Hey everybody, how's it going? So I've been getting a lot of requests to do portfolio reviews on Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. So I thought that I could probably start a series about it. Now, there are a few other design channels doing portfolio reviews. The most notable one for industrial design is Sam Does Design. I highly encourage you to check those out. He has really great videos and I'll link those in the description. I'm going to kind of add my own flavor to it though. And what I'm going to do is probably do a little bit more of an in-depth analysis of some of the products. I'm also going to give these people who submitted their portfolios a second chance to sort of re-review the portfolios in about 2 or 3 months' time. So we can basically see how they progressed, how they integrated the feedback, and how they've sort of grown as designers, which I think could be really interesting. If they didn't do anything, we can also heckle them publicly on YouTube, which is always a lot of fun as well. We're not going to heckle them on YouTube. Please don't do that. One thing that I want to make clear is that, I am not the final arbiter and judge of all that is good design. I would never claim that, and that is not something that I'm saying here. What I'm presenting here is merely one opinion, okay? So that's one thing that I want to make clear. So I'm going to be looking for 4 main criteria. Now, the first one is just technical skills. Can they communicate their ideas effectively? Can they sketch? Can they render? Can they 3D model? All of those things. The next thing is the ability to identify and solve problems, especially in a unique and novel way. So are they able to create designs that fit within the goals of the project and within the goals of the brief? The third thing is manufacturing knowledge. So do you just understand how things are made? Do you have a genuine curiosity in that? Are you interested in learning about that? And the last thing is a fresh perspective. So do you have a perspective that's unique? Do you bring something new to the table in terms of a skill set, in terms of a methodology or line of thinking, things like that? Okay, so let's get to it. The first one that we have here is for Dhaval. Dhaval is, I don't know if he graduated from CCA, but I know he's a student. I never taught him, so this will be interesting. All right, well, let's look at the first project here. So once again, remember the things that I'm looking for. So the first thing is technical skill. Okay, so I do see technical skill here. This is a really nice rendering. Really nice modeling skills. This may even be parametric or generative design, which is really interesting. Good sketching skills. Really nice sketching skills, really beautiful designs here. Okay, so in terms of technical skill, Dhaval gets a nice big check, at least based on this one project. So the next thing is the ability to identify and solve problems. Okay, so one thing to remember is that, most people don't read any of this stuff, especially this. No hiring manager will ever read this, but because I'm critiquing your portfolio and I want to basically give you good feedback, I will. So basically it makes it so that it creates more resistance, I think, and that basically allows for better training. Okay, sure, I'll buy it. However, with that said, because shoes are such an ergonomically demanding thing and because you're making these claims about resistance and training, I would absolutely want to see these prototypes on an actual person and testing them out, because my sort of impression is that somebody would use this and immediately roll their ankle or something. So I would want proof of that. Another thing that's really interesting here is that you have a lot of really cool ideas, but the final product kind of meshes all of them together. And because of that, this design isn't very coherent yet. So I think what I mean by coherent is that there isn't one particular theme. There's a whole bunch of different themes here, and they don't necessarily mesh together or relate to each other in any way at the moment. So that would be my advice to you. And think about how this resistance training might sort of manifest itself physically. That would be my advice to you. The next one is this guy, Curve Hair Dryer. Okay, so once again, technical skills are there, nice photography, good modeling skills, good actual physical model making skills. I see here that there is some consideration for how the internal parts would fit inside, which is cool. However, I wonder about the shape of this design, especially since you've branded it as brown, a brown product. I don't know that this is actually in line with the Brown design philosophy and principles. So let's actually go into Procreate here, and I can tell you about what I mean specifically. So first of all, brown is a very minimal design. So this feels very flowy and organic, kind of, which is fine, but I don't know that that's brown. Brown tends to focus on very sort of geometric shapes. So that would be something that you might consider fixing. Another thing is that brown, I feel like, so you have this curve here. I feel like this curve would be concentric to the one below it, so it would do something more like that. Simply because brown is all about sort of rational design, and I'm not quite seeing that here. Another thing is the balance of this object, both functionally and visually. There's a lot of visual weight here, and hair dryers are all about sort of creating some sort of functional balance so that they're comfortable to use. Really, this should probably be the part that holds more of the weight, and this is where most of the components should be, and then this should be much smaller. And if I recall, the components should be able to fit in a much smaller casing, so I don't know why you need all this length here, and it's visually very distracting as well. Okay, so here's sort of my high-level synopsis of Dhaval's work. I think Dhaval has a lot of really, really interesting and novel ideas. Dhaval needs to show a little bit more restraint. Like, this is a great example. There's a lot of really interesting, cool ideas in here. Individually, they're very cool, but I don't know how they necessarily fit together. And the same thing with the curved hair dryer and how that relates to things. I think that this, I don't even know what it is. Oh, it's the sculptural radio. I think that this seems to have a much more coherent visual language, and I think that this is actually really, really nice. So I would encourage you to sort of learn how to dial things back. Now, this isn't the worst thing in the world, because really, most of the time hiring managers are looking for a lot of ideas from their junior designers. So it's okay that maybe you haven't gotten the skill of being able to filter out what the good ideas are versus the bad ones, simply because you're going to have a senior designer that's going to help do that for you, but you will eventually need to learn this in your career, so it's a good skill to have. So next up we have Siri. Siri was actually one of my first design students at CCA, and one thing that really makes Siri stand out is basically her animation skills and her sketching skills. She's also just a really easy person to get along with, which I can respect as well. Okay, so getting back to the portfolio, Siri actually sent me 2 links. Looking at technical skill, we have a nice layout here. We have pretty good models. We have decent sketches. These sketches are not as good as what Siri is actually capable of doing, so I would like to see these improved quite a bit, because I know that these are not your best sketches, Siri. Another thing is that if you look at this rendering, it's super pixelated, especially around the edges, and it looks very fake. And the reason why it looks so fake is because there doesn't seem to be enough of a texture on this material, and that's not really helping it. And another thing is that the lighting is very gradated. I don't know if that's just the sort of settings you're using. Maybe you're using 8-bit color or something, but if you look at Espen Oxholm or a whole bunch of other tutorials on YouTube for Keyshot, you should definitely look into that. I think that'll help this design a lot. In terms of problem solving, I think this is cool. I don't really know anything about refugees, so I can't really comment on it. This is a really nice image because it tells you everything that you need to know about the design while not having to explain it excessively with words. I think that these are totally unnecessary. Nobody's ever going to read any of this stuff. So I would either figure out how to pare it down to just a couple of words and not complete sentences. In terms of the design, I see that you chose these different colors to induce certain feelings or things. I am not convinced by this color palette. It's very faded. It's sort of this like very muted pastel color palette. I don't know how that necessarily aligns with the needs of refugee children. Another thing is that this design, at least at the moment, feels a little bit engineered and not designed. This almost looks like a very functional, utilitarian, structurally engineered piece rather than something that's a toy for children to enjoy. So I would challenge you to basically look further into the aesthetics of this. More specifically, let's get into Procreate here. These lines are very straight, and I understand why. It's because it needs to fit a straight piece of bamboo in here. But the most obvious thing to do, and I'm not saying that this is how you should do it, but this is immediately what I think of just sort of off the cuff first impression, is if you round this off a little bit, it'll help it feel more approachable and friendly and sort of childish. And like this hole here is an opportunity. Right now it's just like a hole that almost looks like it's drilled through the design. I think that could be a really interesting opportunity. These lines are just a bit too straight for these parts here. I think that if you just curve those the tiniest bit, it'll help it feel a little bit more bubbly and playful. Because right now all of these are just radii. Like everything's sort of like cutouts and radiuses for edges, which is what's making it feel so SolidWorksy, basically. Let's look at one more project from Siri. This project is called Curio. It's a Braille education tool. Okay, rendering's immediately much better. That's awesome. I understand what it is. It's a Braille tool. Okay, cool. I don't really understand what's happening here. This is clearly explaining all of this stuff, but it's very, very hard for me to understand it. And then like there's some really nice ergonomic thinking here, but it's way in the corner, and I would not have noticed it if I wasn't looking very closely. So what else? I can see that there's some... Can I open that up? No, I can't. So there's some good sketches here and all of this, but it's really small. And it looks like you actually built a functional prototype or some version of one. So you should definitely showcase that, because that shows that manufacturing knowledge that I was talking about, right? This also solves a real problem, and I feel like the function is in line with what a blind person might need. I don't know that for sure. I've never designed a product for blind people. But the design is really minimal, and I think that this very pronounced lip here is what allows the person to sort of feel through how the device works and how to find like the bottom and top of it, which is really good. Overall, I think that Siri's work is solid. I think that the areas to improve are just in the technical and rendering skills and the presentation skills, because at the moment, this really isn't doing, Siri's drawing skills justice. You have this really good work around what looks to be a bunch of PCBs, but it's not really explained at all anywhere in the design. I can tell that there was a lot of thinking behind this particular project based on this, but to be quite honest, nobody's going to read it. So figure out how to express it visually. And you might need to do it in a video. That might be the case. So great work overall, just a few little tweaks and improvements that need to be made with the presentation. So next up is Olivier. So one thing that's really nice about Olivier is he really thinks through problems and is very sort of measured and rational in his approach. I've actually taught him before, that's how I know this. Okay, so let's look at the first project here. Now I'm looking for technical skills at first. Rendering skills are okay. You see that little bump there? There's a tiny little bump in the highlight. I don't know if that's the HDR you're using, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was the actual surfacing. And there's also like some sort of a weird shadow here, and I believe that that could be surfacing. So technical skills in terms of modeling and surfacing could use a little bit of work. Also, this is a pretty convincing rendering, but this is definitely not. So you might want to do some research into how to do an in-context rendering through Keyshot. Espen Oxholm has a whole bunch of them, and there are others. The next thing is just overall presentation is good. We have internal components. That's awesome. So there's actually some really good stuff here. This is a nice rendering. This is decent. There's some good stuff happening in here. I think that let's go through the problem solving aspect. I don't fully understand how this works. So I can see that it's for blind people. I know who it's for. I sort of know what it does. It does mapping of some kind, but I don't quite understand how or why. Like why you would need that. I mean, I know that might seem obvious, but one thing to keep in mind is that nobody's going to read this stuff. This stuff right here, nobody's going to read that. So that's just something to sort of consider. Now, in terms of the form, I wonder how you came up with this shape. I think it's good, but I think it needs a little bit of refinement. So let's go into Procreate really quick. So going back into Procreate. So if we look here, this is sort of forming somewhat of an ellipse, but it's not quite an ellipse, I don't think. So this should either be a perfect ellipse or it should be a circle or something else. And then once again, there's this bump here in the surface, and there's a little bump here as well. If you look at the shadows and the reflections that you need to kind of work on to sort of refine that surface. One thing that I will say is good is that because this is for blind people, it's good that it's hard to hold it in the wrong orientation even if you can't see it. So what I mean by that is you have a material change in the back here, and then that wraps around the bottom. So it would be really hard to hold this thing upside down, which I respect and appreciate that you thought into that. The next thing is this piece right here and the way that it comes to a point. This creates a lot of focus in this area here, and even the way you've rendered it does, because you have the edge of this highlight butting right into the surface, and it sort of creates a lot of undue attention to that area. So I think that this should probably be a little bit more rounded off or maybe straighter or something. Another thing is that the design right now looks a little bit too much like a price gun or something. I don't know how to do that necessarily, but I think that because it's so organic, it just feels a little bit, it feels like it needs some refinement in that regard. And what I was talking about with the highlights and the surfacing, the same can be said for the silhouette here. It's not super clear what the surfaces are doing, and I think they need a little bit more refinement. I think that if you stick with more geometric shapes, it will help to sort of elevate the design a little bit. One thing that I should mention is that Olivier is actually really good at sort of designing in that sort of elemental style. This was a project that he did for my class, and this is really an interesting design, but I think that what's hurting it is that this is really cool, but nobody's going to read it. This doesn't have any sort of visual weight. So all of the work that you've done, that I know you did, that talks about this sort of use case is lost. These are really great sketches too. So figure out how to communicate this, and it might end up being through a video. In fact, it probably will be through a video. This is also a little bit blown out here, this light. So look up some tutorials. I think Will Gibbons has one about how to do lighting specific to LEDs and stuff. Espen Oxholm probably has some. Just look up online how to do that on YouTube. Okay, so overall, Olivier has some really good ideas and really good thinking. The only thing is that he's not really expressing it in his presentation. So I think that would be the best thing for you to sort of work on, Olivier. And I have a lot of respect for the fact that you sort of went through the entire product development cycle here, where you have an app that you designed, you put some consideration into how all of this stuff would fit together. There's some really good thinking here, really nice models. Now it's just a matter of expressing the functionality, which I think was really compelling about this project, which just isn't shown here yet. So next up is Karen Wang. Karen Wang, I believe, is entering her senior year of industrial design at CCA. She was also one of my first students. So one thing that's really great about Karen is that she's willing to take big risks with her designs, and she really does a lot of research to understand how the product will fit into a larger scope. But really her biggest asset is she has excellent craftsmanship skills, excellent sketching skills, and once again, she's willing to take risks with her designs, which I have a lot of respect for. All right, so let's look at them. So we have Microsense here. This is really blown out. So let's go through technical skills. So technical skills. Cool presentation style. These sketches are not your best sketches. I've seen you do better ones. This is a nice sketch. One thing to keep in mind with sketches or models or anything is that you're going to be judged by your worst sketch, your worst rendering, your worst 3D model, your worst project. So that's something to consider when you're sort of doing this design work. All right, so technical skills are good. I know that they're good, but these sketches need help, and I know you can do better, and this rendering needs help. So it's a little bit blown out around the edges here. Once again, look up the YouTube tutorials that I talked about in the other parts of this video. Let's actually look through the problem-solving stuff. Okay, so it's a microscope. Okay, those are actual microscope slides, and then these are sort of artistic watercolors. That's interesting. So this seems to be... This is cool. So I like that you actually went through the prototypes and you built actual slides, which are really beautiful. So that's awesome. This is a beautiful shot right here, very compelling. However, the only issue is that this hand here, that hand looks like a zombie hand or something because the color from the rendering is making it look sort of greenish blue, like it's dead. So maybe work on fixing that. I think that you should put this particular image earlier in the process so you can sort of understand what's happening. And you should also put a person using it, even if it's just a prototype, somewhere earlier in the presentation because it wasn't super clear to me how this thing works. In terms of the design, I think it's actually pretty proportionally nice. I think that this is a really nice touch here for the sort of tie-dye effect to reflect the slides. My understanding is that the slides are being projected onto this surface. I don't quite understand why there's a person painting though. One thing that I do really like is that this rendering is in perspective, which is awesome. I think you need more images like this that are really evocative and interesting. And I think that you should make the use case a little bit more clear. And that could be through a video, it could be through a series of images showing how it works and things like that. Next project, Flow. Okay, I've actually designed a whole bunch of faucets, so this will be interesting. I've actually seen this project before as well. I did some critique on it. All right. Okay. So when you're rendering water like this, you want to put some sort of aeration or bubbles in it, otherwise it just looks like a sheet of glass. That would be one piece of advice that I have for you. Technical skills are good. There's a lot of really good model making exploration here. I think it could be made bigger and more clear. These sketches are decent, but not your best. So better sketches. Now, here's the big issue here. I don't fully understand how this design relates to your use case. So you obviously did some level of user research. It's basically a faucet that helps with babies, I guess, like bathing in the sink. I would assume that that's a thing that I've never heard of that. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. But, okay, so that's the use case. I don't understand how this super organic form relates to that. And I also don't understand how the super organic form relates to Google's design language. So if you look at these faucets here, these seem to be much more in line with Google's sort of approachable, friendly, housewares, electronics design language. The one that you've chosen, to me, I don't fully understand it. So let's get into it. There's a surfacing issue that's happening around the handle here, where the handle meets the main body. That needs some help. I think that having the faucet point downwards in this way, I recall you mentioning that it has a functional purpose, but it's not shown anywhere in the presentation. So you need to show that. There's a touch screen here, cool. This area right here is a bit odd. It draws a lot of attention because it has a lot of visual mass in that area. And it's also a bit strange in the sense that it's unfamiliar and the surfacing needs further refinement. So typically, even when you're doing organic surfacing, there still needs to be some sort of a skeleton. There usually needs to be some sort of a skeleton of like geometric shapes or some sort of rational surfacing behind it. So, for example, you have what is essentially arcs to form the spout here in this faucet. You would still want to do that for the other designs that are hyper-organic. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers it. I think that we have some good designs here. There's a chance for you guys to redeem yourselves in about 2 months' time to see how you've progressed. If you don't do any of the work, that will be very sad. I understand that at least one of you got internships, so congratulations on that. And I'm really excited to see your progress, and I hope that this was helpful. If there's anything unclear about this review, please just let me know in the comments, and I'll add some more clarity and some more definition around what I mean by certain things. And thanks for tuning in, guys. If you like this video, do not forget to subscribe. Definitely encouraging, and it helps me out a lot. Thank you. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, which is really awesome. We have grown from 100 subscribers 2 months ago up to almost 1,000. So thank you guys so much for subscribing. Thanks for checking out the videos. I really, really appreciate it very much.